have asked me if I would welcome you, tell you something about the Wilson Center, and introduce our key speaker. The Wilson Center, as some of you know, was established in 1968 as a living memorial to President Woodrow Wilson, the only American president so far who was a distinguished political scientist, a tenured professor at a major university, and head of Princeton University. The founders believed that there should be a memorial which would focus on the range of international problems engaging the United States, which was totally nonpartisan, nonprofit, and which in effect was a scholarly center for research on the critical international issues of the day. It's chaired by Congressman Lee Hamilton. I'm sure there's plenty of material out there about the center. It is a prolific organization which has a major voice in key public policy decisions in the United States. Today's meeting, as I think you know, is being co-sponsored by the Wilson Center, the Partnership to End Hunger and Poverty in Africa, the International Agriculture Trade Policy Council, Charlotte Hedebrand is here, and the German Marshall Fund, represented here by Susan Seckler, who many of you know. The key spark plug in all of this is the partnership, and Julie is where? Oh, there you are. Who planned and is running the organization with the rest of the co-sponsors, and she's done a marvelous job in doing it. It's a particularly timely meeting because I'm sure all of you know the issue of development and the role of aid therein has been on the agenda ever since the Obama administration took office, with a number of major studies underway. The Quadrennial Diplomacy and Development Review, a set of policy studies in the White House, and of course many private studies and interest groups who are engaged in thinking about aid reform. It has turned out to be a little bit like waiting for Godot, because we've been waiting since January 2008, and there's still no clear indication of what is happening. It's a shame because it is an open moment, but open moments close. And as we all know, the administration is deeply engaged in a set of other critical issues upon which the future of the administration is going to hang. So we will have someone with us this morning who is going to give us an insight into very key and important parts of the administration policies. The keynote speaker, as you know from your group, is Ann Tutwiler, a person I have known and admired for, I won't say a long time, but a considerable number of years. She is now coordinator of the Global Food Security Initiative in the Office of the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture. She served as senior advisor for international affairs for Rajiv Shah, the current U.S. aid administrator, when he was Undersecretary of Agriculture for Research and Education and Policy in the Department of Agriculture. She's got a long background in agriculture affairs. As with other speakers, I won't give you the whole details because they're in the materials for the meeting. Two other housekeeping announcements, one of which is coffee out there. I was going to usually tell people that we're not taking a collection, so you could move down front if you wanted to, unlike church, but you're a pretty full group here. And so with that, and the other is, of course, turn off your cell phones and your whether they're buzzing or ringing or playing the national anthem or whatever. That way we will have an uninterrupted meeting. Ann's going to talk on the administration's policies in the Food Security Initiative, and then has time to answer a few questions which she's going to handle herself. So without further ado, Ann, the podium is yours. And I will even get your computer back open again. No signal? There you go.
All right, while we're waiting for the PowerPoint to come up, I want to thank the Woodrow Wilson Center, the IPC, GMF, and the partnership for organizing this. I have to say that all four of those organizations are former grantees of mine when I was at the Hewlett Foundation, and I'm frankly quite pleased to see that there's some sustainability in the world, that those groups are working together. Maybe that's an example of the whole of government approach that we ought to be modeling. It's called, we put it on the...
Is it trade facilitation?
No, it's that one. That we ought to be modeling in the government. So regional integration, I think, is an issue whose time has really come. I think there's been a recognition across Africa in particular of the importance of regional integration, and also in the development community. And I think we've all begun to recognize that, particularly in Africa, because the countries are so small and the borders actually, as a study I think by IFPRI showed us, are quite thick, quite hard to penetrate. Regional integration is the way forward to address a lot of the development challenges we have. But it's a very complex area. There's a lot of moving parts, and so it's probably, I think, one of the most difficult areas for the U.S. government to deal with, particularly as we try to pursue this whole-of-government approach. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the initiative, but in case a few of you aren't, I just wanted to put up the general strategy for the initiative, which is sort of moving away from an approach that focuses almost exclusively on humanitarian assistance to one that deals with the underlying causes of hunger and poverty. And I think it's important, as we see ourselves moving in this direction, to remind ourselves that only 8% of hunger in the world is due to disasters and war and famine. 92% is actually caused by or related to poverty. The other key pieces of this are a country-led approach, which I'll talk about a bit later in the context of regional initiatives, and improving strategic coordination. And I think when we started thinking about this, we were thinking more along the lines of coordination across the donor community, but I think it also applies very much to coordination within the U.S. government. So I want to go back just a second and point out a couple of sort of developments in these areas, so I think some of you might be interested to know where we are. On the first issue, tackling the underlying causes and the comprehensive approach, as a lot of you know, we issued a consultation document back in the fall. We have received a great many comments on that document. They have been incorporated. That document is clearing now through the interagency process and is going to be put back up on the State Department website within the next couple of weeks. That's the 30,000-foot document. There is a second document, which we call the implementation document, which is really sort of bringing this down to 15,000 or 10,000 feet, and that is also very close to being finalized and will be put up on the web for comment also probably a little bit later than the consultation document, but fairly soon. And that one is still in progress, and we will be looking very much to the community for comments on that document. In terms of the country-led plans, as many of you know, we held an initial meeting, the Rwandan government organized an initial meeting back in December where the donor community worked with Rwanda in terms of evaluating their investment plan, and we're moving forward and working with the Rwandan government to develop that into a real set of bankable projects and programs that we can move forward on. And in terms of the multilateral mechanisms, at the World Bank's Executive Committee meeting back in January, they approved the creation of a multi-donor trust fund that is specifically for this initiative. The Spanish government and the Canadian government have made contributions to that already, and we intend to make contributions also pending, of course, OMB and congressional approval of the budget. So this is the results framework for the initiative, and I don't want to talk about this specifically, except to sort of draw some of the linkages to the regional integration. So as I mentioned earlier, the main cause of hunger is really poverty. So this initiative is trying, for the most part, to try to get economic growth growing. And we know that trade is a very strong contributor to economic growth. So that's partially why this regional integration strategy is such a key component of the whole initiative. Trade does a lot of other things besides sort of generating economic growth in terms of food security. It can help stabilize food supplies by allowing food to move from surplus to deficit areas. Trade can reduce food costs by moving food production to where it's most efficient, and also the decrease in tariff barriers, which lowers food prices to consumers. It also promotes dietary diversity, which is something we're really concerned about in terms of the nutritional aspects of this initiative. And it promotes innovation and new investment. So it touches on almost every component of the strategy and the results framework. So I was thinking last night about all of the different parts, things that need to happen in order to promote regional integration. And I'm just going to run through these fairly quickly. So the first thing we don't think about very often is that inputs need to be traded across borders, seeds and fertilizer, and that requires harmonized seed and fertilizer regulations. It requires quality standards so that farmers know exactly what they're getting when they're purchasing a bag of fertilizer or seed. For commodities to move, you also need common grades and standards. Buyers need to know that number 2 corn in Malawi is number 2 corn in Rwanda. When food starts moving across borders, you need harmonized food safety regulations so that countries and the companies who are doing the trade can accept the food and know that it meets certain safety standards. So other areas where we really need to focus if we're going to be moving trade across borders is improving customs procedures with one-stop border crossings, improving transportation with truck weight and height regulations. This is not something most of us think about, but countries often have different requirements for how heavy the trucks can be. Some very basic, simple things, but that can really create problems with trade. And USAID's trade hubs have been beginning to address some of these issues, but not perhaps in a comprehensive way in a way that I'll talk about in a minute. Tariffs are the thing we usually focus on. Clearly, we need to move towards lower import duties if trade is going to move. One of the things that we saw in the 2008 food crisis was that a lot of African countries placed export bans and other export restrictions on their food. And I think this is an important part of trade policy, is trying to reduce the incentive and sort of maybe increase the penalties for countries to do that, because it certainly not only disrupts trade in the short term, but it also creates the kind of fear of an inability to obtain food, which leads countries into self-sufficiency policies. The other challenge I think we need to confront about the reducing tariffs is that tariffs are the way that most countries in Africa get their government revenues. And so at the same time as we're moving to reduce tariffs, we need to move towards finding alternative means of taxation so that countries don't lose their major source of revenue. And finally, on the regional economic communities, this is where a lot of these initiatives come together, and that the regional economic communities are the ones that need to lead the discussions on these issues. But many of these organizations are weak. Some of them have excellent staff, but not very deep staffing, so the staff that they have are very overextended. And this is something that we really need to focus on as we move forward. One of the areas that these regional economic communities, particularly, I think, need assistance with, building up their regulatory and policy analysis capacity. So there's a lot of hardware infrastructure, which I think people after me are going to be talking about. But there's also a great deal of sort of what I called software infrastructure that needs to be built. Commodity exchanges. A lot of commodity exchanges are beginning to pop up. These are eventually going to need to be regional commodity exchanges. For that, you need bank clearing mechanisms, you need market information systems, crop reporting, you need trust. One of the projects that I funded with Hewlett in West Africa actually brought traders together from different countries so they could meet each other, because they were not trusting the fact that the buy and sell orders were really existed until they actually saw each other face to face. Cross-border contracts. One of the issues in parts of West Africa also are that currencies are not convertible, and countries can't necessarily trust that a contract that's executed in one country can be litigated in another. Policy coordination I mentioned earlier, but this is another area where having better data, having peer review mechanisms to make sure that countries are living up to their commitments as they implement regional economic community integration is going to be important. And then I think there's also the piece of this that we think about this all in terms of capacity building and know-how, but there's a lot of financial investment that needs to go along with this, at least in the short term, to get these systems up and running and making sure that they can be maintained. So I'm not going to talk too much about the hardware piece, because I know people who are coming after me are going to talk about this very much, but I just wanted to sort of put these up here to remind us that this piece is sort of the sine qua non of moving forward on regional integration, in particular the development corridors and the hard infrastructure. So beyond trade, there's a whole host of other issues which are part of regional integration. We often talk about regional integration as if it is only trade, but I think we have to realize that natural resource management, again, for many countries whose natural resources cut across boundaries, this is going to be a huge issue, and certainly many people would argue it's the inability to manage these resources has been a contributor to some of the strife in a number of countries. There's going to be a need to work together in terms of climate change adaptation, because climate change doesn't affect a country, it affects a cropping system or a climate system that cuts across borders. Research is something that I've been focusing on quite a bit, and given the high costs of really doing basic research, again, this is something where we need to really strengthen the regional research entities and allow the national entities to focus more on adaptive research and getting that research out into the community. And the last issue is, again, not something that we, in my background of trade, think about too much. But as we invest in infrastructure, as we make it easier to move across borders, there are going to be issues around regional migration that will need to be addressed. Oops. So, the challenges for the U.S. government are in addressing regional integration are fairly significant, and a lot of these issues came out in a couple of regional meetings that we held in early February, where USAID, USDA, Treasury, State brought their people on the ground together in Nairobi, in Ghana, and in Latin America to really start talking about how we work together in the field. And the regional issues were one set of issues where there were real concerns about how we move forward. As I mentioned earlier, the regional institutions vary in terms of their strength and capacity, so it's not always easy to find a partner. The regional USAID missions, which are usually situated in the same city as where the regional institutions are housed, don't have an ambassador. They don't have political leadership, which makes it very difficult for them to sort of raise the profile of the work that they're doing to the level that might be possible in an individual country. The regional aid missions often don't have any counterparts with other donors. Not all donors are in these regional areas, so the donor coordination aspect of what we're trying to do is very complicated when we talk about regional investments. Also, very few U.S. government agencies, besides USAID, has any regional presence. Again, making it very complicated for the whole-of-government approach to really be functional. And even sometimes when we have regional people, like, for example, USAID has a regional person who works for APHIS who's situated in Dakar. The regional mission of USAID is in Abuja. And they talk occasionally, but it's not a very seamless relationship. The last piece is I think really important when we're talking about having a country-led strategy. What does that mean in the context of a regional entity? How do we know that what the relationship that we might be developing or the signals we might be getting from the regional entity are actually in line with what the countries who are members of that regional economic community might be interested in pursuing? So it just makes that country-led process a bit more complicated. Let me say one other word. So as I mentioned, USAID does have these regional missions, and most of them were set up in response to AGOA. And their initial focus was very much on helping African countries export to the United States. They are increasingly working in promoting regional integration and have been doing some really excellent work in terms of trade facilitation and border measures and investing in some of the transportation corridors that Paul will talk about. But that's not their mandate. And these are very good projects, but they're also very self-contained projects in many cases. So when I look at the list of sort of areas of investment that need to be addressed and think about the U.S. government agencies that have capacity to work in those areas, this is just a short list that pops to mind. I'm sure that we could think of many other entities inside the U.S. government who have expertise to offer, both in terms of the strategy, but also in terms of some of the implementation. One of the things I think it's important to point out and makes regional integration also kind of difficult is you really need to have a systems approach to regional integration. This is not something you can have a project here and a project there. You really need to look at this as, how do you make this whole system work? And that's where I think, bringing in the agencies, in the U.S. government who have some expertise in making those systems work is going to be really important as we go forward. And I have to say, as we've sort of developed the initial stages of this strategy, not all of these entities have been actively engaged. And I think we need to move now to the next step of really broadening the scope of the agencies within the U.S. government who are have a role to play in regional integration and in the other parts of the strategy as we move into this next stage. So what does whole of government really mean? There are a lot of people in town who have said to me that this whole of government strategy really means that the U.S. Aid system is broken. And it really is an aberration of this proliferation of activities that we have out there is just an admission that we've failed. And I would really argue that even if we had the aid system that we would all like to see, you still will need to have engagement and involvement by the variety of agencies that I listed and others, because this is such a complex set of issues. It's such a complex set of expertise that we need to bring to bear on this, and no one agency has the understanding to get it all right. And I think one of the messages I want to convey here is that this whole of government approach is not, in my view, an admission or recognition that there's something broken with the U.S. aid system. It really can make it stronger if we do it right. Right now, I have to say, and this is a critique of my own department, but also I see it in others. Right now, our definition of collaboration is sending over the note that we're implementing new food aid programs and saying we're going to announce this on Tuesday. Just wanted to let you know. And this goes, for almost all the agencies I've been dealing with. That's collaboration. We need to get beyond that. The agencies have been working really well together in this development of the strategy and the implementation plan, but we haven't gotten to that next deeper level of how do we really make the consultation work. I'm not sure this is the right set of concentric circles in the right order, but I think right now we are at the information sharing stage of this sort of whole of government strategy. We're getting to the coordination stage, and that is certainly key, that we need to have a strong mechanism for coordinating what we're doing. But if all that mechanism is doing is making sure that the programs that USDA has don't overlap with the programs that USTR has, don't overlap with the programs that USAID has, that in my mind is not enough. We need to go to a deeper level of really getting to collaboration and integration of the programs and activities we have in support of the country-led strategy, in support of a regional integration strategy. There's one agency, I just have to mention this, that I didn't list on the chart earlier, that is very, very engaged in agriculture and food security work, and that's the Department of Defense. And we know very little about what is actually being done there for reasons that I guess you can all imagine. But it's a part of the picture that we really need to begin integrating. I think it's important that DoD understands the importance of food security and the importance of some of the foodborne and diseases that we might have to confront, but we need to integrate what they're doing also into this whole process. So I'll conclude with saying that, I think we all recognize the challenges. What we don't have yet is really the mechanisms and the operating principles for how to make this work now that we're moving from sort of the 30,000-foot level of the strategy and even this 15,000-foot implementation document that I mentioned, but really to grappling with how do we make this whole of government strategy work at the field level and at the Washington level. But I think regional integration is one of the areas where, perhaps more than some of the others in the food security strategy, where we really do need to bring to bear the expertise of many, many U.S. government agencies on the problem. So, thank you.
And you've got time to take a few questions. You want to do it from the podium?
Sure.
Okay, floor is open for questions. Raise your hand, Ann will recognize you. We would appreciate questions or very short, pithy comments because Ann has to leave, and I'm sure she'd like to respond to as many questions as she can. You've got, what, 10 minutes? Or?
I can, whatever, until my time's up. So.
Okay. Questions? You want to recognize people? Or?
Sure, yeah.
Wait, I'm sorry, wait for the microphone so others can hear. And is this...
Okay.
Is the meeting being webcast or recorded? Yeah.
All right. My name is Mara Russell with Land O'Lakes, and I just wanted to know if the presentations will be provided publicly. So your PowerPoint with results framework, et cetera, will that be shared?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That was easy. Charlotte. Sorry. And then back there. So.
Hi, Charlotte Hebebrand from IPC. Thanks very much, Anne. Two questions. regional integration, I suppose, ultimately has to be driven by the regions. So you pointed out this country-led versus regional. How much are you actually hearing from the countries about regional issues? And, you know, did Rwanda, for example, come to you in this meeting in December and say, here are our regional priorities? The other question I have is the EU, of course, is negotiating free trade agreements with Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. And as part of their negotiations, they're basically asking the regions with which they're negotiating to also open up trade vis-a-vis each other. And that has been a controversial negotiation, but nonetheless interesting in that it provides, I suppose you could call it conditionality for countries to regionally integrate. And what do you think, what tools might the U.S. have to try to, you know, I don't want to use conditionality, but to try to encourage regional integration in ways that maybe it hasn't yet?
It's not my memory that the Rwanda plan had a lot of focus on regional integration per se. I mean, I think they recognize they need a route out as being a landlocked country, but not a lot of focus on the regional integration. The regional communities, ECOWAS and in particular, is developing a regional plan at the moment. Right now, we have not seen that plan. I think when we get it, it'll be interesting to see if it's sort of more than an agglomeration of the various country strategies and actually begins to tackle some of these issues around how are we going to move forward on harmonizing regulations and policy measures. So we haven't seen that come through yet. You know, yeah, conditionality is not a word we would choose to use. I think they're one of the reasons we are choosing the countries that will participate in this initiative is because of their regional capacities. I mean, the countries are not public yet, but just to say that they're in regional groupings so that this kind of trade and integration can take place. And that's certainly part of what we're trying to promote. It's not now in the sort of list of issues that we feel like we need to see addressed in a country plan, and that's probably something that, you know, we need to be more active about. But in terms of making it a condition, I think that's very hard to do when you're trying to promote a country-led strategy. Yeah.
My name is Ken Kambona. I am from USAID East Africa. I manage a regional agricultural trade program, and there we work with the regional economic communities. Now, my question is, from your presentation, you know, there is the integration which is led by what I would call politically crafted together regional economic communities. But I got a little of what the private sector alliances between the private and public sector in fostering regional integration. I don't know what your take is on that, but I think that is one area which, if well, looked at, would hasten regional integration. Thank you.
I absolutely agree, and I think about some of the trade associations that USAID has been helping put together and have arisen on their own accord, the regional seed trade associations, regional fertilizer associations, and I think those can actually drive some of the integration, because it really has to almost be coming from a demand side rather than the regional communities sort of pushing and saying we need to do X, Y, Z. I think until they see real demand coming from the private sector or the farmers, it's not going to happen. And I think it's not going to be as pragmatic as we would need it to be, because the seed trade association or fertilizer, they know the regulations that need to be put in place to make their sector work. And we were talking yesterday, and Paul Giordano, I'm sure, mentioned this, is that these regional transport corridors are often forcing countries to address specific issues that they need to address to make those corridors work, and that maybe they wouldn't have addressed if they just were sitting in their offices thinking, gosh, it would be nice to have, a different set of policies between our two countries. So I think that a lot of this does come from the demand side, and one of the parts of the strategy, we really are going to be investing in building up the civil society and private sector organizations so that they can be participating in those kinds of dialogues and actually, in some cases, driving those dialogues.
Anne, can you take one or maybe two more questions,
sure.
and then we'll go on to the next session?
Okay. And then Mima after.
Thank you. My name is Marcia Eccles. I direct the World Food Law Institute at Howard's Law School. I don't know whether you have read the inaugural address of President Mutharika when he became president of the African Union. And he mentioned his theme was Africa should feed itself. And he mentioned regional trade cooperation, including in infrastructure development. But he also mentioned continent-wide cooperation. So I don't know whether you have a comment about that. But my other question is, when you say integration, what do you mean? On the chart, whole of government, integration is at the top, and we're still trying to reach that. So is that what you mean by integration? And isn't that contrary to the idea of country-led development?
I'll take the last question first. So in this case, integration is really an integration of the U.S. government agencies and activities that can be supportive of regional integration and provide expertise, but in response to country-led strategies. So the notion is the country puts together a strategy, and they indicate they want assistance in particular areas or want contributions from donors in particular areas. And the goal, in my view, is that the U.S. government can work together around that strategy to see what we can do to be helpful there. And we're not going to do everything. A country has to do some of this itself. There may be other donors, but to really look at what expertise the U.S. has to bear. But right now, it's very much USDA is looking at this set of issues, USTR is looking at this set of issues, and I think we need to be more integrated in how we approach the issues that are raised, the problems that are identified by the countries that they want to have solved. In terms of your first question, I think this is a process of moving forward towards a broader, political and economic integration across the continent. And I think that's, I have not read the inaugural address, but I think that is certainly the goal. I think if you look at the history of the European Economic Community, it's taken 40 years, 50 years for them to get to the stage where they are now. And it's not an easy process. And I think, one of the slides I had that I didn't put up was this very complicated overlapping map of the regional economic communities, and I think the first step is really to start kind of rationalizing that and beginning to align the regional economic communities so that countries aren't members of 3 or 4 of them, and then continue to move forward with a broader continent-wide strategy. One of the books that's on my bedside table that I read until I fall asleep is actually a biography of Andrew Jackson, who was president of the United States when there were a lot of countries, states who were wishing to secede from the Union. And in his second inaugural address, he has the most eloquent statement of why we needed to have one union in the United States. And it basically goes to all the issues we're talking about in terms of the states being too small and trade not moving and food security. I mean, all of these things. It's was quite surprising to me to read it. But I think that's the goal. But I think we're a ways from there.
And I think we should end now. You want one more? One more back there.
Yeah, I'm fine. So, Josh.
Thank you, Anne. I thought that was an excellent presentation. I'm Joshua Walton, retired, Hence, I feel at liberty to play a bit of a devil's advocate.
So I knew this was going to be a hard question.
A couple of things. And I'm going to be very frank here. I mean, this looks to me like bureaucrats talking to bureaucrats. And, you know, as long as government agencies have meetings with 30 people in the room that are numbingly long to come to a decision that a private sector team would do standing up in a hallway and do it in 10 minutes, I just don't think it's going anywhere. USAID has a hard enough time achieving internal agreement by itself. We all know that. We know how interminable this process is. And at the end of the day, the people who are going to solve this problem are almost 90% in the private sector. The role of government is to help create the environment for the private sector to prosper. But they're not the people that carry out the action. They're not the people that make it happen on the ground. I don't think the expertise exists in whole of government. And frankly, in this day and age, when you say whole of government, I hope I don't offend the person who came up with this term. You know, they're probably sitting in some sea of cubicles and hoping that they'll get a promotion for having come up with it. But when you tell the American public today...
Why don't you come to your question rather than...
Well, this is the point. In this day and age, you say whole of government to the U.S. public, and they're going, what? The entire government's going to get involved in foreign aid?
What would you like Ed to answer before she has to go?
I'm just saying, that's the challenge. You know, because this thing seems to be very far on its way in, and I understand what you mean by whole of government. I know what the group understands. You've listed 9 agencies. That's probably 4% of the total government. But I'd like to see this in USDA, in US Today, saying, "Oh, we're going to take a whole of government approach to foreign aid."
You'd like to get Ann's reaction to this. People are going to be lined up with
pitchforks and torches.
Okay.
You know, frankly, you know, that's what you're looking at. So, you know, don't you think one needs to take a...
There's your question.
A little...
Okay, Ann, why don't you respond to that, okay?
Well, I have to say I have never been in an interminable meeting with 30 people who, you know, we have short meetings.
I've been in many of them.
We actually have something called a stand...
Okay, let her answer. Okay,
we have
so
we have a stand-up meeting at USDA, 15 minutes every day. We end up sitting down and it takes 30. So
let her answer the question, okay, so she can go on.
So I have to say part of the rationale for this strategy or this approach was hearing from developing countries that they were dealing with so many different U.S. government agencies who had no idea what each other were doing in the field, were duplicating effort or leaving things undone. So I think that's where this idea came from, and I think it was Secretary Clinton who may have come up with the idea. So I don't think she was in a cubicle. But anyway, but I don't disagree with you that, you know, and I mean the private sector is going to drive this, absolutely. And what we in the government need to be focusing on is creating the rules and rules of the road, the regulations that are going to enable that to happen. And I think that's the focus of this. I don't think anybody believes, I don't believe, that the $22 billion that, you know, the donors are going to put into this, hopefully in the next 3 years, is anywhere near enough to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. And if we don't get the private sector, including farmers, investing in their own activities and create an environment, we're not going to get there. And I think that, you know, one of the things I think that is important in terms of this whole of government approach is that different agencies do have better understandings and links to the private sector than others. And, you know, we need to bring that perspective to bear into this debate more than it has been.
And thank you. Wait a minute. You've had your time, okay? You're using a lot of it now.
All right.
We want to thank you for coming. I know your schedule is very busy. And we're going to move quickly to the next panel. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I've been asked to say there's plenty of seats down in front, and for those of you who arrived late, I promised we would take a collection at the end of the meeting. So we've got a lot of seats, and that people who are standing relatively uncomfortably may want to move down here. I also neglected at the beginning to say that one of the key movers in this meeting is Steve McDonald, who's head of the Wilson Center's Africa Center and program, and I don't think he's here yet because he just arrived back on a plane from the Eastern Congo, but I'm sure he'll be here before the end of the day. I'm now going to turn to the first panel, which, as you know, is on the key subject of infrastructure. And we're fortunate to have Dr. Mima Nedeljković with us, and I'm going to ask he and his panelists to come up here. And I think we've got a seat for everybody.
You know Bill, right?
Bill White. Yeah, that's right.
Are you just going to talk on John Sewell?
Yes, of course. Yes. But just, I think it'd be easier for me to sit.
Yeah, okay.
Always do names.
Got it?
That's a rule.
There is, as you see, a distinguished panel. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Nedeljković, who is now with the Schaefer Global Group, and he's working heavily in Liberia. He has, as you will see from the bios, I promised people at the beginning I wouldn't read the whole bio,
Yeah, please.
that he's had a long and distinguished career working in Africa in the private sector, but managed to move away from that for the latter part of the 1980s and 1990s when he was U.S. Executive Director to the African Development Bank, where he was instrumental in formulating a major private sector initiative. So without further ado, Mima, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, John.
And the floor is yours until we break for coffee around 11 or so, okay?
Great. Thank you. Morning, everyone. I can never resist moderating a panel on infrastructure, so lest you think this is just my tribal chief's cane, it's actually the result of 2 years of Liberian roads. Well, my back has been broken, so that's part of what infrastructure is all about in Africa, unfortunately. Before I pass through the panel, if I can just sort of set the theme here on infrastructure. Schaefer Group's been operating I think we're reaching about 50 years now in Africa. I joined them when I left ADB in 93. So myself, maybe 30 years running around the continent, all over. And the one thing that always strikes us, and I'm a project finance guy, in putting the projects together, be it Schaefer's a Louisiana company, so we're big into sugar factories, rice mills, cogen power. We can control the cost of putting up the factory, the mill, the power station. We know what that's going to cost us. What we cannot control, and always ends up being that additional factor, is the cost, the differential cost of the infrastructure in whatever country we might be putting up the project. I can't control that. I mean, at the moment, in fact, with the African Development Bank, we're putting up a very large public-private sort of financing on the Marcala sugar. And as we started putting that together, we had to put in sort of what we're calling the Mali factor. And that's not a sort of slang for anything going on, conspicuously. The Mali factor is literally the cost of the additional input on infrastructure to put that factory up and develop those estates that we wouldn't have had otherwise with our strategic sort of deep pocket partner, Ilova Sugar, out of Durban. So we added 10%. That is the additional cost of all the extra infrastructure that otherwise would not have cost us for example, in South Africa. So when many years ago we joined the partnership, what really attracted us was that aspect of, as practitioners, what is that extra and additional cost that people often forget that's called infrastructure or lack thereof. So I think with that introduction, and I think you all have the CVs, so I don't think we need to be introducing the panelists, but I will I'm not sure the order here, but maybe the order that we're sitting in. We'll go ahead and each person will present the, oh, there is an order, sorry. I come out of places without order. Okay, so let me then first turn to Paul Jourdan, who actually, during the ADB years, the first time I ever heard of spatial development in quarters. This is Mr. Quarter himself at the time in the South African government. So, Paul, can I turn to you first, please? And I think each will make presentation, then we'll take the questions at the end. Okay? Paul, please.
Thanks.
This way.
Thanks, Mima. And thank you all for coming today, and particularly to Julie and Anne and others who put this together. Global poverty, just using a very crude index of GNI per capita, we can obviously see that our focus area, Africa, is where most of the countries are concentrated. I then looked at it, and basically they all fall into this ellipse. I then looked at it and said, well, you know, is this really a basket case? Is this ellipse full of countries with no potential, with no opportunities for growth and development to overcome the negative indices? If we go through them, we see they all continue as expected over this ellipse. Infant mortality, child malnutrition, hunger density, malnutrition and famine together, all in this ellipse of despair. But does the ellipse have no growth and development potential? And here I will argue apparently not. If we look at agricultural potential, it's mainly in the ellipse. If we look at water resources, it's in the ellipse. If we look at groundwater resources, it's in the ellipse. If we look at your minerals, again, very much in the ellipse, and where there are gaps, they tend to be recent tertiary cover. This was a study done by the USGS on where future resources might be, Global Mineral Resource Assessment Project, and the future potential lies mainly, again, in the ellipse of the very countries that we're talking about and the people that we're hoping to change, whose lives we're hoping to change. Elevation, you can see it's a mix between the Great African Plateau and lowland areas. Non-fuel mineral deposits, again, pretty much crossing the whole of the ellipse. So, why haven't these resources been realized, this latent potential of these countries in Africa been realized? And maybe we can prove Adam Smith wrong. It's not 200 years. I saw the quote 1776, so it's more like 240 years or something. But in any case, there's always been this problem that Africa is large, bulky, doesn't have navigable rivers, does not have gulfs, doesn't have access, and also is the highest continent, and most people are very far from abilities to trade, either with each other or with the rest of the world. So the argument I'm making here is basically that high differential rent resources, such as minerals, but occasionally agriculture as well, could finance the infrastructure to connect the interior parts of the African continent. We heard earlier that there's no ways the kind of aid money or donor money goes anywhere near the kind of investment that we need. And basically you need revenue streams from users so that you can have PPP infrastructure, private-public partnerships. This was the study done for NEPAD several years ago, looking at where these corridors are that would open up the agricultural, forestry, tourism, and mineral resources of Africa, and they pretty much also cover the ellipse with some gaps, which we obviously need to look at. So the SDI, which is Spatial Development Initiative, also known as Development Corridors methodology, and many people here have seen this slide. This slide goes back about 15 years, but it's a very simple slide. It's identify the viable economic resource investment projects. What is the latent potential that I've just showed you in the earlier slides? The mineral, the tourism, the forestry, the smallholder agriculture, the agribusiness, etc. Now, why hasn't that happened? In many cases, it's because they're stranded. Usually, Africa has the highest logistics costs in the world, and you can't get your inputs in and you can't get your outputs out. Or if you do, you end up with a bus back, like Mima.
Thank you.
So what are the infrastructure needs to realize these resources? And then, of course, at the same time, these resources provide the revenue streams to underpin the viability of said infrastructure. It all seems very simple, but it's not always simple. And why the second is, does government, donors, region recs particularly need to get involved? Why doesn't the hidden hand of the market just sort all of this out for us? And basically, there are 4 market failures. One is the infrastructure economy of scale. One project can only move, say, 1 million tons. Needs a railway line, but you're not going to get a railway line with 1 million tons per annum. Usually the minimum is about 8 to 10 million tons to make a railway viable. And building 1/10 of a railway line doesn't work either. So one needs to have some sort of coordinating, putting together users or cargoes to try and make these concessions viable. If you've only got 1 million tons, no concessionaire is going to pick up your bid documents. But if you have agglomerated 8 million plus tons through various projects at the same time, then you've got a goer, I'll come to that later, as we've just seen on the Central Corridor in Tanzania and Rwanda. The other is the synchronization of users over time. You've got projects that will come to fruition and be needing the infrastructure in year 1, 2, 3, 4, and this can then be brought into the concession and underpin the viability. The third is the obvious one we all know about. Political borders are always a market failure. Things don't move freely across borders. Humans don't, capital doesn't, and goods don't. And finally, information data. The investors out there aren't aware, quite often, of these opportunities. So part of the development corridor SDI approach is to build these projects, to get them out into the market, to concession them in a transparent way if they involve a state asset or a state servitude, or to find likely investors if they downstream more industrial type investments that do not require the leasing of a state asset. This is the quick example of the Maputo corridor, which is a mature example. It was a PPP on the road, 600 kilometers, which was done as a seamless project. It didn't stop at the border and then there was a different project on the other side. It was one project, so the governments had to get together. We had to harmonize the regulation. We had to harmonize the whole adjudication, etc. And that has been a success. And it's now about halfway through the concession. And at the end of that, the two governments will get, from a very bad road in 1995, they'll get a superhighway back given to them by the concessionaire, and then the governments will decide whether to reconcession it or what to do with it. The second was a PPP, well, no, it was a public-public partnership between the two electricity commissions to set up a company that they jointly hold for the electricity. The power station with the transmission lines under Matraco to Maputo, that then there was a private sector investment at the time, Gencor, now BHPB, into a major aluminium plant, a PPP on the port. At the time it was Mersey Docks, but that has changed. Of course, time moves on with new owners. And then a public-private partnership on the line, which is owned jointly by the governments and the Petrochem company, And basically the two resources with high rent here that underpinned the whole infrastructure was coal in South Africa going into electricity and going to Mozambique, and gas in Mozambique going to South Africa into liquid fuels and petrochemicals. Then that didn't give much impact. A big six-pack like Duvia employs a few hundred people. Okay, it produces 4 gigawatts, but employs hardly anyone. And a big refinery, it's not refinery, but smelter, like Mozal, also only employs about 1,000 people. The cost per job is several $1 million. The big impact was in the other sectors that were facilitated through the improvement of the infrastructure, particularly forestry. There's several pulp mills, agriculture, sugar, a lot of fruit in the Inkamati Valley, etc. So the impact is in the other sectors, the sustainable sectors. The gas is not sustainable. There's about 3 TCF, and it will run out in about 20 years' time. The coal is not sustainable. Eventually, the coal mines will be run out. But the other sectors are sustainable. I should just mention here, we had a problem. If you see the last bit here where my cursor is, the big agricultural stimulation where we created the enabling environment for the private sector happened on the South African side, which is humming with new investments, and because there was an enabling environment. As you cross the border, you have got the same very rich volcanic soils, and there's nothing but little hovels of charcoal burners who've chopped all the forest down, because the requisite infrastructure, the soft infrastructure, as Anne mentioned, wasn't there. Things around land tenure, things around capital, microloans, things around agricultural extension services and marketing. So by doing the big infrastructure, it's all running straight through that area. Everything's there, superhighway, electricity, everything's there, but it's not happening. So it also shows us we need to go further in what we call densifying these corridors, and we need clear strategies around that. This is the idealized, very idealized configuration, usually a high differential rent resource in the interior, with a cluster obviously around it, its own cluster of inputs industries, etc. Then the trunk infrastructure that's normally PPP-able. You can usually PPP the gas lines, the rail line, because you have the cargoes and the usage. You can PPP the water. Then you hit the problem, is you have the high impact, which are these stranded investments or stranded agricultural biome node that's very good. How do you bring them in? Normally that infrastructure is not PPP-able. And that's if you have limited fiscal resources on the budget of government or through donors, that's where I would strongly suggest our focus should be, because this is the big impact. These nice big stars, they look big. They reflect most probably the capex, but it's the small ones that are the most important in terms of impact on people and people's lives and putting plates on people's dinner tables. The current DC initiatives at the moment that I'm aware of is the NEPAD SDP, which is still under review, the NEPAD Business Initiative, which we have a representative here, the Beira or Zambezi Agricultural Growth Corridor, the RSIDP, which is the old South African government one operating in the region, the Central Corridor, Mtwara, Bakongo, which has just got a project manager a few months ago, and then the new initiative that I am advising them on, which is ANSA, Angola, Namibia, South Africa, Luanda, Lobito, the north-southwest coast, Namib, and Walvis. And Mozambique is now setting up its own SDI unit, and they are looking at the Nacala, Zambezi, Beira, the north-southeast coast, Limpopo, Lubombo, and Maputo. And then the Northern Corridor Transit and Transport Coordinating Authority are also looking at converting a logistics corridor to a development corridor. And then on the logistics side, doing a lot of work on the soft side is the North-South Central Corridor, supported by USAID, DFID, and many others, SADC and COMERSA. These are the ANSA ones that are being discussed at the moment. These are the Mozambican ones, and they've also, in their strategy that was passed by the Council of Ministers last year, are looking at some of the critical feeder infrastructure to open up the area and to impact on more people, mainly around agricultural potential. The Beira, which is really the Zambezi, is a bit of a confusion in names, agricultural growth corridor with the private sector, alliance. I think this is a very exciting initiative. It's doing a lot around the densification that I spoke about, around fertilizers, irrigation infrastructure, water, etc., making sure that we get that enabling environment, that it doesn't just end up with a heavy, big infrastructure, which has happened. On this corridor, the railway was signed off about 3 weeks ago, finally, between VAL and the government, and they've finally agreed on a tariff. And so we should see the railway has been repaired by an Indian company, and we should see the export of the coal, which will then put into effect the infrastructure to be used by the other sectors. So this is overlapping with the Zambezi SDI and partly with what we call the Beira SDI, which is the one going through to Harare. It requires greater integration in the Mozambican SDI program, which is still nascent and obviously will happen as that develops. This is the CDC, or the Central Development Corridor, where the critical anchor is the rail, a new line from Isaka to Kigali, and then the old German line from Isaka to Dar. And I'm pleased to announce that a multilateral ministerial meeting has decided to concession this rail all the way from Kigali to Dar, and that the two feasibility studies, one done by an American company, the other done by a German company, are both showing that this is viable. So we hope it's all systems go for the central corridor, which then obviously could have, depending on politics in the Congo, could have implications on the interior. The northern corridor, which again shows a lot of collaboration with different RECs and also different donors and others, is looking at going all the way through to northern Congo, Oriental province, but also critical for southern Sudan. It could become a route out, much shorter route than going via the Red Sea for southern Sudan through Mombasa. The project is at the moment, the critical constraint is the configuration of anchor projects with enough usage to underpin or upgrade, to underpin the upgrade and or establishment of new infrastructure. And that's where we are at the moment. It's proving to be a bit difficult, but we are optimistic. My final slide is what are the critical interventions that I believe that governments, donors, and other bureaucrats should make. The one is the DC concept studies. Don't end up with a DC that does not have viability. This needs to be done very quietly, because once you announce a DC, you can't come up and say, actually, it's not viable. We can't see the potential or the cargoes or the usage for the infrastructure. The second is the project preparation. This is critical, especially the PPPs require enormous amount of work to develop the concession documents, the RFPs, etc. And that is a lot of projects don't happen because of the lack of resources to develop the documents that would give you the investment. The resource projects as well, particularly if they involve state assets, also need the same project preparation, the project development into pre-feasibility studies, full feasibility studies, bankable feasibility studies. The project concessioning process, always a very fraught area, and that's where transaction advisors are critical. The World Bank is coming to the party on mineral projects with the new ITAF, Extractive Industries Transaction Advisory Facility, and the African Development Bank with the African Legal Advisory Facility. The legal and regulatory framework we've heard before, densification, and finally, densification is very much the smallholder, the golden triangle of having finance, extension services, and marketing. and of course the tenure problems, and finally the deepening, to unpack these big projects to optimize the developmental impact in terms of the inputs, the upstream, downstream, and side stream. We all don't like conditionality. My final comment is I personally would say that these need to be more than one country, that cross-border DCs, which enhance regional integration, should be supported, and secondly, that the principle of using PPPs where viable should be an underlying principle of these corridors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. I know there's much to be said on development corridors, and we'll have a chance with the Q&A. Let me turn now to Vivian Foster from the World Bank. I guess Dr. Infrastructure, I think, from World Bank standpoint, and really bring us up on the work they've been doing on the bank. Vivian, please.
That was very good.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to be with you today. Well, our previous speaker emphasized that any regional spatial corridors need to be complemented by feeder infrastructure that reaches out into the rural hinterland and enables the development of more sustainable sectors and employment-generating sectors. The emphasis of this presentation will be precisely on this rural infrastructure platform. So a shift, if you like, from looking at the arteries of regional integration to the capillaries of infrastructure in the rural areas. This work, these results are derived from the Africa Infrastructure Country Diagnostic, a major new knowledge program that was launched towards the end of last year. It's been a multi-year, multi-stakeholder, multi-country, multi-sector initiative. And as a result, we have a new knowledge base on the infrastructure sectors in terms of basic data, research, and analytical tools, which are available to practitioners at the web portal www.infrastructureafrica.org, and I'd encourage you to visit that if you're interested in this topic. So my presentation will be organized around 6 key messages, and I'll give you a snapshot of each of the major rural infrastructures and the challenges in developing them for rural development in Africa. The first message is that the challenge of developing rural infrastructure in Africa is particularly large. And I'd like to begin by differentiating the rural space a little bit, because it's there are two basically quite distinct areas. The first is the rural hinterland that lies within 8 hours travel time of major urban centers. And most of Africa's rural population, 58% of the total population, lives in this rural hinterland and is producing an agricultural surplus. 85% of crop production is coming from there. And there's essentially a virtuous cycle between excess demand for food in the urban areas and excess and surplus production in the rural hinterland, enabling those regions to move beyond subsistence. The other 17% of the population is in the so-called deep rural areas, which are just physically too isolated to participate in this food market and is basically functioning on a subsistence basis. And it's in this rural hinterland where our attention will initially focus. Low rural coverage of infrastructure. As of today, coverage of infrastructure in urban areas is 5 to 10 times higher than in the rural areas. The costs of developing network infrastructures tend to escalate dramatically in rural areas because of economies of density and the low densities in those areas, and also because of the low purchasing power of the rural areas. It makes it difficult to provide the incomes, the affordability to sustain those investments. Not only that, but there are practical challenges in developing rural infrastructure because of the difficulties of maintaining it. Whereas 1/3 of rural infrastructure needs rehabilitation due to lack of effective maintenance, compared with only 1/4 outside of the rural areas. And historically, only about 20% of public investment has gone into infrastructure in the rural space. If we start with the road sector, we find that the cost of improving very low levels of rural road accessibility rise exponentially as we move outwards. As of today, only 1 in 3 rural Africans has access to an all-season road, and in the case of many countries, the percentage is less than 1/3. This lack of road access effectively isolates farmers from participating either in national or regional or even international markets. What would it take to improve these indicators today? This chart shows us the kilometers of road network that are needed to increase rural accessibility beyond the current level of around 30%. So today, the entire classified road network in Africa is about 500,000 kilometers. If we wanted to reach 100% of rural dwellers with an all-season road, we would need to triple the classified road network to about 1.5 million kilometers. Clearly, that's not something that can be done overnight. And the cost, if we try to do it over 10 years, would be about $10 billion per annum. What we found in our research is that a gradual approach that focuses on prioritizing agriculturally relevant land would appear to be more tractable for the continent. So, for example, with about 600,000 kilometers of all-season road, you can reach 80% of existing agricultural production. And with about 900,000 kilometers, you can reach 80% of the potentially highest value agricultural land in the region, in the continent. And so the need to harmonize rural road development with agricultural development strategies. Key message number 3, it's economically viable to double the current irrigated area, but this result is highly sensitive to containing the costs of irrigation development. Irrigation in Africa is currently pitifully small, it's confined to a handful of countries, and only 4% of agricultural land is irrigated, but that 4% produces 20% of agricultural value, indicating the productivity importance of irrigation. We find here that if we set a rate of return threshold of 12%, about 5.4 million hectares would be viable for small-scale irrigation, and about 1.4 million hectares for large-scale irrigation based on large dams. And there's certainly about 1.7 million hectares of existing schemes that have fallen into disuse that would need to be rehabilitated. So overall, the investment requirement would be about $3 billion, and the rate of return about 25%. However, irrigation is mostly viable only for cash or high-value food crops, such as horticulture, and where revenues fall much below $2,000 per hectare, it is hard to make the economic case for irrigation. This graph simply shows that as the costs per hectare rise, the number of hectares that are viable shrinks very, very rapidly. So by the time you reach $5,000 per hectare, you've essentially killed the prospects for small-scale irrigation. In this map, you can see the areas of irrigation potential. The colors yellow, orange, and red indicate large-scale potential. The darker the color, the higher the returns. And the areas in green shading into blue are the areas of small-scale potential. Again, the darker the color, the higher the rates of return. But overall, small-scale irrigation is typically offering higher returns than the large-scale schemes. In terms of where the viable land is concentrated, there are about 15 countries that have a substantial irrigation potential. And whether you look at large scale or small scale, Nigeria is by far the #1 country, with 600,000 hectares of potential small scale development and 2.5 million hectares of potential, 600 of potential large and 2.5 million hectares of potential small. Key message number 4, rural ICT coverage is already a reality ripe for further exploitation. Whereas in the other areas of infrastructure, roads, irrigation, power, we're going to find that there's still a big investment agenda before we get any reasonable level of access. In ICT, the signals are already there. About half the rural population already lives within range of a GSM signal, and that's rising exponentially. And the price tag for reaching universal coverage is really quite low compared to taking other infrastructures out into the rural areas. And with a suitable regulatory environment, most of that investment would be delivered by the private sector on a commercially viable basis, so that only about $200 million per year of subsidy is needed to achieve universal ICT access in rural areas. Clearly, the GSM signal has major potential to distribute information products to farmers, be they price data, weather forecasts, extension services, and that potential is only just beginning to be tapped. But this is a case where the infrastructure is already there. Here you can see the red line, the dramatic escalation of GSM penetration in terms of the signal availability in rural areas. And looking at it spatially, the red areas are those that already have the coverage, at least as of 2006. The areas in dark grey are the areas that are not commercially viable and would require some public subsidy. All other areas, even if they're not currently shaded in red, would be commercially viable for private initiative, so that only 7% of the total population is not commercially viable. Key message number 5. There's a long way to go before rural areas are going to be electrified on any significant scale. The potential for rural electrification is even further behind any of the other infrastructure sectors. Rural access to power is only 12% at present, and it's expanding by only 0.5% of the population each year. So that puts universal access easily 100 years away. The national power networks are in a state of crisis with supply shortages and very high costs. And Africa, in a sense, has not even achieved urban electrification, let alone rural electrification. In many countries, about half of the rural population lives more than 50 kilometers from a distribution substation, and that gives you a sense of how far away the grid extension is. However, countries that have attacked rural electrification proactively with rural electricity funds and agencies are doing somewhat better at accelerating access. Off-grid solutions are, of course, an option, but at today's costs, they still remain very high. Many of them are above 20 cents per kilowatt hour, which is pretty expensive electricity. Here you can see the actual rural access rates across countries, and you can see how many countries have rural electrification even below 5% of the population. And in this chart, the diagonal stripes show you the percentage of the rural population in each country that's more than 50 kilometers from a substation, and hence is far, far away from any kind of rural grid extension. My final key message is that developing a rural infrastructure platform that addresses all of these infrastructure gaps would require a sustained investment of the order of $25 billion per annum for around a decade. And this is how the costs break down. The ICT, $1.7 billion a year, relatively modest cost to complete the universal access agenda. Irrigation, to double the current irrigated area and exploit the high rates of return land, would be about $3 billion a year. Just to add 2.5 million new rural power connections each year, about $4 billion. And to ensure that rural road connectivity is available to 80% of agricultural production would be about $2.5 billion a year. If we also added in the costs of achieving water and sanitation, Millennium Development Goals, that's about $13 billion a year. So the total is $25 billion, but about half of that is related to those production-oriented infrastructures, and the other half is related more to social services, such as water and sanitation. So in conclusion, if we are to complete a regional integration, we need to think not only about the arteries, the regional corridors, but about the capillaries, the infrastructure platform within the rural areas that enables farmers to access both local, regional, and international markets. To do that, we need to look at the key production infrastructures, irrigation, roads, power, and ICT. And if we rank those infrastructures, ICT is the lowest hanging fruit. Roads and irrigation are achievable at moderate investments. Power is probably still a long way ahead, and water and sanitation is a somewhat separate agenda. But the overall cost for the productive infrastructures round about $12 billion a year for a decade. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. A fascinating cut at all the different aspects of infrastructure. If I can turn now to Bill Lane, who's been a long time with Caterpillar, and of course CAT is a major implementer, I guess, on the equipment side of the infrastructure projects. Bill has also been quite involved with the sort of trade and global engagement issues here in Washington. So, Bill, please.
First of all, thank you very much. It's really an honor. One nice thing about being here is you learn so much from your fellow colleagues, and hopefully in the give and take. I always sort of make it a rule that I try to stick to what I know and not pretend that I know everything. And so if I could, I'd like to keep this relatively focused. I've been with Caterpillar for 35 years. Caterpillar makes the big yellow equipment that if you have children, you have to sort of pull off to the side of the road and watch them work for a while. And we're global in reach, and when we look out the world, there's just enormous demand. In fact, as impressed I am with the numbers as far as what it would take for infrastructure development in Africa, I think it probably just scratches the surface of what we really need to do. So I've got a good feel from what it takes to facilitate infrastructure development. For the last 20 plus years, I've been Caterpillar's main representative on trade issues, and we've sort of staked out of the position of being one of the most free trade, if not the most free trade company in the United States, and in fact in all the countries we do business. And if I could leave you with something before we get to the end, is that I'm not going to try to come up with 6 critical success factors or anything like that. But I want to sort of not bury my lead, if you will. Most of the time that I spend in Washington, I focus on issues dealing with tariffs and quotas. And that's what we work with. I mean, that's what we know about. And I like to think of myself as a above-average lobbyist, although that term's no longer in vogue, if it ever was. But now I think I'm one of the poorest because, dealing with trade liberalization, whether it's at the multilateral, regional, or bilateral level, it's not that the administration's against anything. It's just it's not a priority. If you were to list 25 priorities, free trade with Panama or Colombia or preference reform, it's just not a priority, even though it has, great potential to improve people's lives both inside the United States and outside the United States. And that's where we put all of our attention. So when we talk about free trade, we talk about free trade as it relates to government interventions as far as taxing or quotas or things of that sort. And it's not a cottage industry, it's a mature industry, and people can make a living at this gaming the system for their whole career or for generations. But there's 2 other trade barriers that are much more pernicious, and the folks in this audience, you've traveled to all over the world, and you see it on a day-to-day basis. One of them deals with capacity building. And, if you're at a country and if you're on the border between Kenya and Uganda and you're treating customs as an employment vehicle rather than a function to facilitate trade, that's an enormous trade barrier. And when you have trucks backed up for a couple days while they're waiting to go through customs, I understand why that takes place. And I thought Ann made a very good point on, sometimes you need to have tariffs because you don't have a mature revenue system. So as a result of that, it is a way to bring in foreign capital. But if that's your mindset, then you've got a man-made trade barrier that is clearly worse than any tariff or quota that you can come up with. Just a side note, and I know Chile's in the news. Of all the countries that I've dealt with, I've always thought the one that had one of the most enlightened schemes over the last 15 or 20 years is the way they handled trade liberalization. They understood that they needed to have an external tariff, which was pretty much uniform on all products. But they made it a matter of policy that every year and a half or 2 years, they cut that tariff by about 1.5 points, so that there was a long-term commitment to trade liberalization, and that this didn't become a crutch, but it became something they had to continually improve their competitiveness to address. And sometimes I think when you look at countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, that would not be a bad model. You could start with a 15% tariff, but as long as you were committed to, say, every 2 years cutting 1 percentage point away from that, you could get to a point in a decade or so where it becomes more of a nuisance than a trade barrier. But what we're here to talk about is the other type of trade barrier. And as far as I'm concerned, this is by far the one that gives the most hope, but also gives the one that is the biggest of them all, and that's the lack of infrastructure. Sometimes I think we're a casualty of our own good works in the sense that working with the German Marshall Fund or being a member of the Help Commission, whenever we talk about infrastructure, we always try to be politically correct. And in this notion, there's all this talk about green jobs and things of that sort. So whenever there's a talk about bringing power or electrification to Africa, there's usually a picture of a windmill. And that's fine. I mean, I like windmills. They're terrific, and they're good for peak power at times. It's an expensive form of power. But the main goal is, in Africa, we need businesses that can make money, that can attract investment, that can grow, that can employ people. And to do that, you need to have a seriousness of mind that, first, let's get a reliable power grid. Then, if we want to talk about ways to reduce the carbon footprint or things, that's fine. But let's first get viable enterprises, employing people and improving lives. When in the United States, we talk about hundreds of billions of dollars that we're going to use for improving or updating infrastructure. In Africa, we talk about tens of billions of dollars for the entire continent to start establishing an infrastructure. As part of the Help Commission, one of the most enlightening trips I took was through Haiti. And we had to have specially outfitted Land Rovers, Toyotas. They seem to go very fast, but they were specially outfitted to have snorkels, because when we traveled through Haiti, it was often preferable to travel through the rivers than travel on the roads. It was better on your kidneys and everything else. And you sort of knew when when the earthquake and others happened that the problems in Haiti were, just to the American public, just really obscured, because the feeling was this was not nearly as a desperate society as it really is. There's a lot of places where the river is a better road than the road. And at Caterpillar, we often say that the road to development begins with a road. So let me just bring this to a close with a couple of hopeful points, and then one other deal that I'd like to sort of urge you to action. One is that within the development space, at no time in my experience, there are two positives that have occurred. And sometimes we don't give credit for this. One is that the business community and the NGO community is playing better together, working better together, promoting the same cause much more so than ever in the past. The distrust that existed 15 or 20 years ago, there's always going to be a little distrust, but it's not really there. I mean, we all see it's in our common interests to figure out how to get poor countries to start benefiting from the global economy. Secondly, in a world or in a city where the number one discussion point is how Republicans and Democrats aren't playing well together and have this destructive path, when it comes to development, we've sort of walled that off for a while. It's going to get hard. It's going to get much harder as we move on. But if you look at the successes of the past administration on development, and I want to keep it to that, and when you see what the President Obama has done to build upon that, there's plenty of room for both sides to claim credit and pat each other on the back. And if we can maintain that space, I think it's going to pay dividends for all of us. It's going to get much harder as the budget concerns go up exponentially. But so far, that's a good place to be. Thirdly, when you talk about trade, tariffs, quotas are great. Capacity building is more important, but what's really important is a lack of infrastructure. Lastly, as we move forward and we start talking about jobs, I mean, numbers are going to come out on Friday, and they're probably going to be sort of discouraging. But I want you to think about this from a parochial Caterpillar perspective. We're one of the country's largest exporters. We export far more than half of what we produce in the United States. We export around the world. And we've looked at a strata of where we export to. And we export to, really almost every country that we're allowed to. And even where Cuba, for example, we'd love to be able to export there, but there seems to be some hurdles there. But when we look at on a per capita basis, we export 3 times more products per capita to a lower middle class or income country than a poor country or a low income country. 3 times more from a upper middle than a lower middle, and 3 times more to a high income to a upper middle income. The point is, if we can figure out through good public policy, whether that's development, whether that's duty-free, tariff-free strategies, and I urge everyone to pick up a copy of this report, the white paper on development that's out there. Just an excellent job. But if we can figure out how to get countries to move up one notch, Caterpillar's exports will go up. I mean, we will go from being a cyclical company to a growth company for as far as the eye can see. The growth potential is absolutely enormous. I think it comes out to like 45-1 between a high income and a low income country. So my point being, we need to do a better job communicating. We need to play well together. That doesn't mean we give everybody we don't criticize each other, but we need to keep it constructive. But more than anything else, we've got to stay focused on dealing with the real issues that hinder development. And one of the biggest, I mean, corruption, and there's a lot of other ones, but one of the biggest is a lack of hard infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. The practitioner's perspective, always a good one. Let me turn now to Ali Abu Saba, who's the Director of Agriculture and Agro-Industry Department at the African Development Bank and manages some 250 operations and a portfolio about $3 billion. I think the ADB's got some interesting initiatives that I believe Ali will be telling us about. Ali, please.
Well, thanks, Mima, and thanks. Good morning to everyone. I think my job is now a bit easier. The fact that Paul and Vivian had, covered a lot of ground of the kind of issues that I would like to have to talk to you about. But I still would like to share with you some, specific points that are of particular interest on and have bearing on the way the African Development Bank intends to support agriculture. I think the starting point is the fact that the agricultural development in Africa has not done so well over the past 40, 50 years. And this is a sad result for a sector that has the greatest potential to pull Africa out of poverty. Investment in the sector has been proved to generate far much more revenue compared to investing in other sectors. And the linkage to infrastructure is quite clear, and the kind of challenges that the sector faces are quite numerous. But I will not attempt to actually touch on everything. I'd like to select a few and possibly give you some perspective from our views how they could be addressed. Rainfall in Africa is quite unreliable, especially in the recent changes with climate change impacts everywhere. It's very difficult now to predict when to plant and when to harvest, when will the good rain come, when will the bad rain come. Recent experience that is taking place as we speak in India, recent droughts that happen in India are likely to result in a decrease in crop production by about 10%. In a country like India, given the kind of and the amount of food that they produce, you can imagine how can that have an impact on the global economy. We are far from going into another crisis, but I mean, if we have a series of these events, one would not rule out the possibility of going back into one. Africa in general is behind compared to Asia, where the area under irrigation grew from actually 25% to 40% over the past 25 years, compared to currently less than 4% of the total potential for irrigation being developed in Africa. It is quite natural to say that secure water supply for growth and socio-economic development is a significant challenge for African agriculture. A huge potential for regional integration remain untapped due to the weak regional cooperation in transboundary river and lake basins. Furthermore, the poor water governance practice actually continues to limit the efficiency with which the resource is being managed, and certainly the impact that it could have on improving the current food security situation in Africa. Poor infrastructure, especially rural and trunk roads. I think Vivian has shared with us very, very specific figures based on the joint work we have done with the World Bank and several others from the Africa Infrastructure Diagnostic Study. And basically, this poor state of infrastructure continued to constitute a significant challenge for the development of agriculture and food security in general. While 50% of rural population of South Asia lives within 1 hour journey to market, 50% of African farmers live within 5 hours or more from the nearest market. That can demonstrate the magnitude of the challenge you have to overcome. But also it explains why, until today, African farmers are unable to make a significant improvement in the levels of income and in the ability to produce. Not only are there fewer rural roads, but actually the transport cost in Africa is the highest across the entire world. And this is, of course, something that cannot continue if we really want to reverse this state of inadequate food security in Africa. If you take that, the impact of this poor state of infrastructure on some of the very important factors into crop production, that is the input supply, you take the fertilizer in particular, in most East and Southern African countries, the cost of inputs is about 40 to 60% higher compared to what other farmers in Asia or Latin America would pay, basically because of the increased transport cost. Now, that is also applicable to the business development services. It's also applicable to the high cost of agro dealers being able to service the smallholder farmer, and then the chain continues. Now, the commodity market structure is generally characterized by lack of market linkages, as I highlighted earlier on, and limited opportunities for agro-processing and post-harvest losses, which currently, by the way, stands at about more than 40%. So more than 40% of total food produce goes into losses. And, the cost of being able to fill in the gap, it's going to be quite expensive. So the above challenges are compounded by the weak capacity of institutions, and I think this topic we've discussed over the past few days with a number of colleagues that were present in the room. Now, this whole story combined has a very direct negative impact on the ability of African economies to attract private sector investments and also foreign direct investment. I think, Mima and his team are quite brave, the least to say, in having the perseverance to continue because, they have a cause they believe in, and I think we're working very closely to help move in this public-private partnership, hopefully together. So to address the challenges, and I mentioned earlier on, these are not a comprehensive set, but this is a selective set of challenges that I have selected to basically introduce to you how we're going to respond to them based on the African Development Bank experience. So to address these challenges, there is need more than ever before actually for us to work together at countries, donors, civil society, NGOs, and foundations. Each one of us in his area of competitive advantage to contribute to addressing these controls. I think the figures, particularly on the investment side, shared with us by Vivian, demonstrate the magnitude of the challenge. Even with the best intentions, even with the LACULA commitments, even with all of us scaling up our commitments, we're still going to be short of what is required. But I think what is important at this point in time is to see where we can gain efficiency, where we can identify efficiency gains, where we can complement the work of each other so that we can maximize the total output of all of this development assistance going forward. And I think it's an opportunity to commend the work of the U.S. government to promote this whole government and trying to create synergies, coordination, and then improve the overall efficiency within the U.S. aid in particular is being provided. So the African Development Bank developed a strategy that is focused and selective, and it's basically aligned to pillars 1 and 2 to the CARIP program, those of you who are aware of the Africa Agriculture Comprehensive Development Program. The 2 pillars are very much in line with the 2 topics 2 presentations we have listened to earlier on this morning. Pillar 1, focusing on expanding the area under sustainable land management and reliable water control, and the second being to improve rural infrastructure and trade-related capacities for market access. Very quickly, the guiding principles for this strategy calls for a selectivity and complementarity with partners, country ownership and alignment, results focused, smallholder farmers being at the heart of this strategy. It, of course, calls for adequate treatment of gender-related issues, and, of course, environmental and climate change accountability. So the specific areas of intervention with the African Development Bank going to support going over the next 5 years going forward are mainly in 3 areas. One is in the area of water mobilization and irrigation water management. In there, we intend to work with partners to mobilize around 10 billion cubic meters of water. Now, this is a small contribution, but it is almost 1% over the current level of mobilization, the very low level of 4%, which I've mentioned earlier on. So, although the figures appear to be small, I think it's a significant improvement going forward. The second area is to try and work on efficiency gains by putting a special effort to reduce post-harvest losses, working with all 53 countries. To identify where could be the efficiency gains, what are the specific set of interventions at country level that could help improve and minimize the losses across the entire value chain. And we have adopted a target for ourselves to work towards mobilizing investments to reduce post-harvest losses by 3% over the next 6 years. Now, this has potential to close the current food gap by about 10%, but at a fraction of what it would actually cost to produce the same amount of food. Specifically on the area of rural access, we have programs to put in place about 10,000 kilometers of rural access roads, building and linking to the other work that is supported by the African Development Bank, working through this PPPs that was mentioned earlier on by Paul. And then in the area of irrigation water management, we plan to invest and help mobilize resources to put in place 500,000 hectares of irrigated land over the next 5 years. We will continue to support a broad range of other interventions, but not using the core delivery machinery of the African Development Bank. I mentioned the experience that we are currently working on with the CGIAR system and IFPRI, both of whom have adequate capacity in their area of expertise. So we believe by focusing the delivering capacity of the institution in fewer and selected areas that can make significant contribution, and then help support other institutions that have better comparative advantage in other areas to basically do what they are better placed to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ali. So if I were just to summarize in one sentence the common theme of all panelists here, I mean, it's literally the lack of infrastructure is a major cost factor that basically makes most of Africa worldwide uncompetitive when you do value-added production. I mean, it's as simple and as complicated as that. So I think we've been authorized to chip away into 15 or 20 minutes of the coffee break. So if I can then turn to questions, please introduce yourselves, who you are, and direct the questions, and I'll move around to different people for discussion. Please, first question. This gentleman there. There's the microphone.
My name is Doug Tinsler from Commodities International. I perhaps have the dubious distinction here amongst everybody present of having been present at the creation. Early on in my career, I spent 2 years working with the Club du Sahel and the SILTs. I had the title of, for USAID, of being in charge of agriculture and river basin development. At that time, USAID, the World Bank, all of the European donors, there was a massive effort to do work in the Niger, Lake Chad, Gambia, Senegal, all the basins that you know about. Getting ready for the partnership meeting this past week, I went back and looked at some of the statistics related to Lake Chad. In 1963, I believe, Lake Chad had 26,000 square kilometers. As of 2003 or 4, whatever the latest satellite imagery, it was 1,600 square kilometers. That says to me, at least in the course of my career, and many of our careers, it's an unmitigated disaster of what has happened. So what I'd like to pose to the panel here, there needs to be some meat for the wolves. Projects on the ground, not studies, not plans of what the potential is. So we don't have another 30 years of, there'll be no Lake Chad.
Thank you.
Point.
Thank you, Doug. Maybe we should take sort of 3 questions at a time, then we can route them. Tony, I think you had your hand up.
Tony Carroll, Manchester Trade. Probably can hear me anyway, but I'm not quite as loud as Joshua, but I have probably also a pretty good voice. I was stunned by Vivian Foster's statistic on was it your statistic on irrigation potential? And having worked in northern Nigeria for many years, also stunned by the underutilization of existing infrastructure, particularly in Sokoto, Bauchi, Katsina, Jigawa, where they have massive irrigation schemes, vastly underutilized. And one of the challenges that I find in working in that space is the lack of integration, and Paul sort of points to this in his wonderful presentation. Thank you, Paul. Is the lack of integration, sensible integration with storage technologies. And to a certain extent, I know, having worked in some depth in the red onion business in Sokoto State, they produce massive quantities of world-class onions, 40% of which get lost before they're to harvest, and then they get just beset by terrible cyclical market conditions because the crops come on to harvest in abundance and drives down the price. So, Bill, throwing it to you, at Caterpillar having not only the earth moving but also other capacities, are you looking in alternative technologies for some of these markets that may not necessarily provide opportunities to you right away, but in 5, 10, and 15 years might provide opportunities for Caterpillar in adjusting to maybe solar-powered agricultural storage, or looking at smaller-scale trenching equipment, or alternative fuel trenching equipment, things that are more applicable to Africa but may not necessarily provide you with bottom-line returns in the 2 or 3 year horizons that you usually ordinarily expect.
Thank you, Tony. Let me take one more. Susan, please.
Hi, I'm Susan Seckler. I'm actually with the Hewlett Foundation, not with the German Marshall Fund anymore. But my question has to do with continuing from what Anne said and what you all have been talking about. We keep being pushed back about the question of the government doing business with business. And in one case, and I think Bill was part of it, the administration actually said, no, they were offered help. No, we don't want to talk to you. We're not supposed to talk to you because of the laws on advisory committees. Is there any progress being made about, and I agree with Bill, we're all playing together very well, but really having, trying to get a whole-of-government approach to what's happening in Africa is just very difficult because the administration doesn't seem to have a contact place that has any real legs and ability to do business.
Thank you, Susan. Let me turn to some of the questions here. I think there are sort of 2 sets here. One was really very much around the water issues. If Ali and maybe Vivian can tackle that, and then we'll come back to the more of the trade and issues and questions that Bill. So Ali, please, on the water matter.
Let me pick the Lake Chad question. I think it's a very valid concern that you have raised, and I think this is why the African Development Bank last year granted a $55 million grant to the Lake Chad Authority to basically address this situation, hopefully to be able to stop this current state of degradation and then putting in place a number of studies to recommend on actions that are needed to reverse this trend. Now, there are so many options. Some of them are very, very wild, including the possibility of looking at inter-basin transfer of water to replenish the lake. But I think this is still a very controversial suggestion, and no one knows for sure at this point in time whether it will go or not. But the point here is the concern is very valid, and there is currently action taking place, and I think even colleagues from the World Bank are working with us on this particular operation to complement the funding that is coming. So I don't know.
Viv, do you want to add to that?
I think a part of the question was also about what's actually being done on the ground. And I just wanted to highlight that there has been a big upswing in external finance for African infrastructure, or at least up until the financial crisis, that was the case. If we go back to 2001, there were only about $5 billion total flowing in from different sources. But by 2007, we'd gone up to over $20 billion of external finance. And that was due to three unrelated but sort of synchronous trends. One is just the big political commitment following Gleneagles to scale up ODA, with the multilaterals and the bilaterals all scaling up their effort through the Infrastructure Consortium for Africa. Then the private sector responding to the much more favorable macroeconomic environment in Africa, a huge upswing in private investment and infrastructure. And finally, actually, the non-OECD players, China, India, the Gulf states, also going in a big way with major funding. So actually, I think there was a lot of momentum. Obviously, the financial crisis has been a hit to that. But overall, a lot of those projects have been committed but are still in the process of implementation. So I think there's quite a strong pipeline of things going down on the ground at present.
Thank you. You know, just if I can add on water, since obviously we're in agriculture, so that's always the deal maker, the deal killer on our investments. I'm always struck with this figure of that Ali brought up of only 4% of the African rainwater that goes down and ends up going to the sea or underground without any value added. I come back to that uncompetitiveness, and that's a major aspect. Bill, I think there were two questions that were directed at you, one on the sort of alternative technology and the other more on the Washington environment.
Yeah, let me work backwards. I was the only member of the only Republican on the Help Commission that actually called for a Department of International Development, that we should have we should elevate the position within the U.S. government. It didn't go anywhere, but I got to have my one page, if you will. I think you've got, whether it's Gail Smith or NSC or whether it's USAID. I mean, there's several points. The administration is taking this very seriously. I don't think there's any problem there. When I went through the analysis, my big concern was that you need modern human resources to the Foreign Service. I mean, they're still working with really arcane rules that go back, very union-type deals where young people today want to, go into the Foreign Service, work for 10 years, go into maybe the private sector for a while, and then come back later on and not have to do visa interviews to sort of go through the pledging routine again. And I know my kids, I worked for one company for 35 years. My kids have already, surpassed me a couple times over as far as working for different organizations. And, I mean, it's a whole new, we just have to adjust, and the government's really slow to adjust from that account. And maybe if you had a more unified, higher elevated policy, you could make some real progress there. In fact, of all the groups, the group that tended to have the best HR was actually the intelligence agencies, because there's this need to go in and out of government at various times in your career. Anyway, it didn't go anywhere. The other thing is USTR. I think that's been a great example where when you did bring it together, you gave a career path for highly professional people so they could really take the function seriously over a long period of time. So your answer is I think the administration really cares. There's a couple points of contact that I would focus on over at state or at USAID or at NSC. Secondly, as far as the question on Caterpillar, we've expanded our product line and things of that sort. We still, everyone's talking about the importance of small business. Our number one objective is not to become a small business. I mean, so the focus is still grow, and I'm really proud of the way we've reacted to the downturn and what have you, and we're taking all our markets seriously, and we're trying to make sure our customers succeed during this time period. So we've got a broader range, a lot on the power generation and what have you that are many, many times cleaner than what they were 10, 15 years ago. So that's all positive. To me, the big question is money. How do you attract the investment for Africa for infrastructure? I think one of the keys, look at the MCC compacts. This is, in theory, the country saying, what do I need the most? And like 60% of the money is going to infrastructure, which means there's this enormous desire. And if you go back far enough with the multilateral institutions, infrastructure was a big part of it, and then we got away from that, and now we're sort of migrating back to it. But there is a hunger for infrastructure all over the world, and more in Africa probably than anywhere else in the world. One other thing, we have these preference programs that do a good job of giving duty-free access to products that aren't made or not desired in the United States. And, we need to make it simple. If you're a poor country, of course you get duty-free access to whether it's Europe or the United States. And we've got to get over that. We have to just make it simple. And a lot of the programs out there, and I know the German Marshall Fund's been playing a key role there, is to really promote that. We don't trade with Africa in a serious way. We buy petroleum from Africa. We buy minerals from Africa. We buy textiles from South Africa. And that's 95% of the trade with Africa. So, we've got to get serious about this, and part of that is infrastructure. As a practical matter, there are no trade barrier. I mean, we're not collecting duties from Africa because of the preference programs, and that's for two reasons. One, we have the preference programs, and two, we don't have the imports. So, anyway, the challenge is daunting. So, anyway.
Thank you, Bill. Let me take three questions from the back. I haven't gone over. The gentleman there.
Thank you. Ken Cambon again from East Africa. Now, my question is to Vivian and Paul, and the notion or the concept, if I may call it, of arteries versus capillaries in infrastructure. Now, the one point that seems to come out clearly here is that we are building on the infrastructure in Africa that was laid about 100 years ago by the colonial systems then to serve a market outside Africa. And we seem to be putting more emphasis on that as we plan for these new arteries and capillaries. Now that's